I would say that temples have so far been looked as religious monuments. I'm going to look at them as political institutions. We're going to get a sense of how Cholas made the money to build such temples. We're also going to get a sense of why they invested the money in building temples like this. And we're going to take a very brief look at one or two of, one really famous temple of theirs and one set of not so famous temples of theirs. So the core of the Chola Empire is really in this area of Kumbakonam, Tiruchirappalli, that area. But their roots are much further south over here, which is where Nagapattinam is. We hear of the Cholas first in inscriptions, interestingly, only from the Ashoka edicts. So that's around the 3rd century before the Christian era. In terms of literature, we have a lot of literature of the Chola kings from Tamil verses on them, again from that period and a little later. But we don't have hard evidence of them. We have literature evidence of great munificent kings, of kings who prevented war from happening, kings who gave gifts to poets, and also who knew how to have a good time in terms of partying. So we have all of this from the Chola period. But really, in terms of specific archaeological, tangible remains, most of what we know from the Cholas are largely from the 7th, 8th century onwards, especially the 9th century, when Vijayalaya Chola invaded and captured Tanjavur. And from the 8th century, 9th century, the Chola capital became Tanjavur, which is a little further south, Tiruchirappalli on the map. And then things changed a lot. So they continued in existence as a power to reckon with all the way from that period till the 13th century. So we're talking about 3rd century to 13th century. At some point in time, there were Chola kings all over this place, and at least for a good 10th century to around the 12th century, they were really the power to reckon with, not just in India, but in the East Asia as well. So that was their height of the imperial Cholas. But as a Chola empire, they've had a fairly long period of rule. And their key to their wealth was really in the Kaveri Delta. So if you can look at this map very carefully, you will understand how geographical location was the key source for their power. If you look at this very carefully, this part is darker green in color all the way till here. And that's the Kaveri Delta. Yeah. So the power of the Chola kings was because they controlled an area around a river that never went dry. And not only were they able to control the river, they worked very hard in linking many of the tributaries of the river and building canals across tributaries. So this entire area is a huge network of rivers, tributaries, and canals. Because they were able to manage water so well, paddy grew well. And for those of you who know your agriculture, rice needs water. And because they were able to have a fixed supply of water, they were able to grow rice. And they used the same rivers to also transport the rice to godowns, which meant, because rice is a perishable commodity, the faster the harvested rice goes into a secure place where it is not troubled by rats and things like that, is really the wealth of the country. They were able to do that as well, again using waterways, and that's really what made them very, very prosperous. So any bloody battle that happened with the Cholas happened way above Tiruchirappalli and Kumbakonam in the Tiruvannamalai region, because they never allowed enemies to cross the Tiruvannamalai area, because this Kaveri Delta was the source of their power. And likewise, you can see another source of power for the Pandya kings way down in the south over here. But if you contrast the dark green over there and the dark green over here on the bottom, you will understand why the Pandyas never had the benefit of Tamraparni is also a river that doesn't go dry, but it doesn't have the scale that the Kaveri has. So this is the fundamental reason why the Cholas were so effective, were so powerful, because they had access to water. And because they had access to water, they could grow paddy. And they used that same waterways to transport that paddy to a safe location. So food security was completely taken care of. The other thing that the Chola kings also did was, for at least 3 or 4 successive Chola rulers, they never had succession disputes. So while the king was reigning, he would already nominate his heir apparent. And in the south, in the Pandya kings, they never did that. There was always a fight for power. So a lot of civil war issues happened. In the Chola Empire, they never let that happen for at least 3 or 4 kings. The third thing that they did right was at least the 3 top Chola kings who largely are responsible for the empire being what it was, were personally fighting battles in the battlefront. So they were militarily, they were very, very efficient, and that was backed by preventing succession disputes, and even successors were chosen not in terms of birth, but in terms of merit. So a successor would be tried out as a governor of a province, and if he succeeded as a governor of the province, he would become the king. So this is something that we need to understand to just get a sense of where they actually got the money to build these kind of temples. So this is the empire of the Cholas. They started from around 900 ACE, but this is at the best of their times, and you can see that pretty much most of East Asia belonged to them. And even today we have remnants of these names. Malaysia has a state called Kedah. Kedah's root word is Kadaram, which is a Chola word. Cambodia's root word is Kamboja, which must have probably been a Chola word. So were these the first Indian dynasties which went that far? Not really. The Pallavas went as well. The Pallavas also created many towns and villages which we still have in Tamil Nadu and large parts of South India. But the Cholas did this with a lot of military efficiency. And therefore, many of the places that we have, we give them credit to, are actually during the Chola period. And for them, trade was extremely important. In fact, Nagapatnam, Thiruvotriyur, which is just outside Madras, Mylapore itself, which is in Madras, these were all very important locations for Chola merchants to go across on trade. And one of the first military battles of Rajaraja Chola, was one of the most famous kings, was actually on the other side of Lakshadweep. Kandanur Sale is a naval battle that he won, and his ascent to power was because he won that naval battle. So in a way, they had the trade route fixed. The trade route moved from the southern part of Tamil Nadu to the part of Kerala, and they had their entire part of that trade route fixed, which meant that they guaranteed safe passage for trade, and therefore they got tolls and taxes out of it. So agricultural income was important. Traders and tolls and taxes were also an important income for the Cholas. So this is where they really get their economic prowess for investing in temples. A bit of a dull photograph, but right about there you can see this handsome man with a mustache and a top knot. This is Rajaraja Chola, one of the few royal portraits we have of an Indian king from that period, and he is praying to Adavallan, who is Nataraja, the deity at Chidambaram. Rajaraja Chola was a remarkable king, and he had a very, very strong sense of purpose to be great, and many of the things that we learn from the Chola period are really from his time. Suffice it to say that his coins, and this is an example of his coin, it's called the Standing Man prototype. His coins were considered legal tender for more than 300 years after he died, which is much more than what we can say for the 1,000 rupee notes that we used last year. Yeah. So Rajaraja was a famous king because he did a few things right. The first thing that he did right was he was very, very focused on sources of income. And the primary source of income for the Chola king at that time was agricultural tax. And if you had to be aware of what agricultural tax, you needed to know where the agricultural property was. Rajaraja, like a few Chola kings before him and a few after him, one of the first things that he did was he actually did a land survey. And in the land survey, and we don't know what the status of the land survey is, but we can glean it from inscriptions. Land survey recorded almost close to 1/300th of an acre. That was, and this is like smaller than the square feet property values that you talk about in Mumbai. It is much smaller as a unit, so which meant that the king knew exactly how much of tax he will get from each village. Not only was that happening, taxes were calculated for every agricultural area in terms of the fertility of in 12 different ways. So there were 12 ways in which you can calculate tax for one plot of area. It could vary in terms of the height it was from the water source. So the higher it is, the lesser the taxes, because it takes effort to put the water to grow the crop over there. If there is shade around that area, the tax is lower. If it is closer to a water source, the tax is higher. If the soil quality is good, then the tax is higher. So it had a very, very nuanced system of tax collection as well. And he was very clear that his job as a ruler was only two things. One was to prevent external aggression conquering his territory, and the second in terms of ensuring that people paid their taxes. Everything else that the village had to decide on was left locally. So the federal structure was far more federal in the Chola period than it was today. So here was a man who was very, very clear about where his income came from and sullied and ensured that the biggest threat for his income, for his well-being, was taken care of by avoiding military issues, by being very good in terms of fighting battles. Our earliest, but this doesn't answer the question of why did they build these temples and why did they invest in temples. So our earliest temple structures are these kind of cave temples, which are hewn out of one piece of rock. For those of you who've been to Mahabalipuram, I think you will remember the cave temples, for example. And you have a very large network of cave temples in Maharashtra as well. Baja is a great example. And of course, we have Ajanta and Ellora as well. The idea of a cave temple came at a time when slowly rituals had become more and more important. If we go back 4,000-5,000 years back to our Rigvedic hymns, the premise is very clear on where a temple should be. Nature was seen as God, God was seen as nature. Fire was the most important element, water was second important, and wherever there was fire or water, that was seen as the nature of God. Now this worked well for a society which was largely cattle raiders or hunters. Towards the end of the Rigvedic times, when the Copper Age gave over to the Iron Age and the plough was invented, slowly society started moving from a system of largely cattle rearing and hunting to a system of agricultural settlements. So now if you go back to your Ramayana and the Mahabharata, which were written transition period from the Yajurveda and beyond, the fundamental rule in these epics is you respect my property, I will respect your property. Land becomes extremely important. Suddenly, for human beings, land becomes property, not territory. So for animals, land is territory. For human beings, land is property. So the sense of ownership is much higher. When this happens, society's income also goes up. So agricultural communities will always be more wealthy than communities that are largely dependent only on animal husbandry or on hunting. As society's income levels went up, rituals became more and more important. Suddenly your Vedic deities, who are all amorphous concepts like Mitra and Hota and Tvastir and all of them, they didn't make a lot of sense to an increasingly wealthy, prosperous and sophisticated society either. So slowly temples started being built because society was settling in and they started becoming more urban. When these temples started being built in South India, we had our Pallava kings to start with in the first time period to actually think of, why don't I hew out cave temples out of solid pieces of stone? So even today in Mahabalipuram, you can notice in some places the technique that they use. So a cave temple like this, they would have cut a grid on the wall, on the rock face, and they would actually have bored through that grid to create a temple space inside. This actually, cave temples merit a separate talk, and we should do that at some point in time, because these are phenomenal feats of engineering. Today, our guys, when they build, they usually can't get two lines to meet straight at a 90-degree angle. Remember, these are granite temples which is the hardest rock to carve. And they didn't have the fancy equipment that they had today. They just had a chisel and a hammer and a plumb line. But yet, the Nandi will be facing the Shiva deity. All of this will be in situ. Nothing is carved outside and brought in. From the mother bed, the Nandi comes up, and between his horns, you can see the Shivalinga. This is the kind of precision that you can see. The pillars will be exactly symmetrical to each other. The corners will be at 90 degrees, and some of them went even further with acoustic properties. So if you speak from outside, you will hear it inside, but you can't hear it outside. You can speak from inside and you can hear it outside, but you can't hear it inside. So this is so we have one cave temple which has acoustic properties as well. So as these temples started to be built like this, kings are getting more wealthier. Society is getting more urban. Now slowly trade income is also coming in, apart from agricultural income. Suddenly these kind of hewing caves and building one
temple out of one cave, one rock alone is very restrictive for a wealthy king. So he says now, rather than hewing into a cave and being restricted by the size of the monument, let's actually cut the stones into pieces and we'll build larger temples, which is how these kind of temples started coming up. So the Chola period is a transition from the cave temple to the built temples, but you don't find Chola cave temples at all because in the Kaveri Delta there are no mountains. Right? You don't have mountains in the Kaveri Delta, so temples in the Kaveri Delta were originally built with brick, and during the reign of the imperial Cholas in the 11th, 12th century, because funding had become no problem at all those brick temples were converted into stone temples. So this is the kind of, this is of course Vijayanagar, it's much later, it's around the 16th century, but I just wanted to give you a sense of perspective of how a simple cave temple moved to such a massive construction, completely proportional. I think you will see all the corners intersect, and this is a massive place. This is outside Jinji. To give you a sense of how smaller temples become larger temples because economy, the geography, the society, and the political compulsions move from a smaller building becoming a larger building. And when I talk about this to kids, I say, well, my first vehicle was a bike. And then when I made a little bit more money, I bought a Maruti 800, and now I have, where I had, at one point in time, I had one car, today I have two cars. That's really the progress that you see in temples as well. Yeah. So the other reason also is slowly Deva Alayas, which were temples. Deva is a god and Alaya is a house. In Tamil Nadu, Deva Alayas slowly became kovils. Kon Illam. Kon is a king, Illam is a house. So why did these temples, houses of God, become houses of kings? And this is, I think, where the Pallavas, and you find this in the Vedic deities as well, and you say that you have to revere your clan chief like Indra and all that, but as a very tangible concept, the Cholas really institutionalized how the god has to be equal to the king and the palace has to be equal to the temple. Because the biggest, and those of you who work in organizations will appreciate this, one of the biggest issues that leaders have today is how do I legitimize my authority over a larger set of people. Sometimes it comes because I'm a managing director, because I'm a vice president, but people don't believe in us just because we have a particular position. They need to have other psychological motives for believing in us as well. Kings happen to use religion. So when you compared yourself with God, and faith became a very tangible way in which people could believe in what you said and trust in your leadership to govern the entire country, which meant that by the Chola period in the 10th century when these temples were being built, everything that you expected from the government today was provided by the temple for the local community. Chola temples had hospitals attached to them, they had educational institutions attached to them, they collected taxes on the king's behalf, they provided employment opportunities, they provided art and culture. So literally anything that you expect from the government today, the temple gave for the local community. This worked well for religion because it meant that religious property was safeguarded by the king. It worked brilliantly for the king because religion gave him a sense of legitimacy to rule the larger country. Which is why you will find that Rajaraja Chola, many times, he dedicated himself, compared himself with his favorite Kula Devata or family deity, Adavallan, in the Chidambaram temple. So when you see Chola temples moving from these small constructions to these large constructions, not only do we need to see the interplay of geography and economics, we also need to see political ambitions playing themselves out, largely in terms of my quest for legitimacy, in terms of saying everybody around us, and this is a genuine problem that we face even today, everybody around us, and especially for people in organizations, are asking, why should I be led by you? Why should I be led by you? Some of us can say it's because of I'm the head of a company or I have a hold a certain position. That might institute compliance. But a deeper sense of faith, a deeper sense of agreeing with you comes from more nuanced psychological issues. And I think the Cholas used faith very carefully to get that sense of agreement. So these kind of temples, and this is in Kodumbalur, and Kodumbalur is a great place for you to start to just understand how in the larger span of history, nothing much really matters. Would you believe that this place is in the middle of a wilderness? There's hardly anything around it. This was one of Imperial Chola's largest, most thriving capital. This was a massive place, may have been a good size comparable to the way Bombay is today to India. That's Kodumbalur for you today. There was a third temple close by. These temples were built by the Irukavale chieftains who gave a lot of legitimacy to the Chola kings. So the Chola kings were still young at heart at that time. They were still a nascent dynasty. They depended on local chieftains to bolster their power up. And the Irukavale chiefs were one of them. Kodumbalur is not too far off from Trichy. It's completely barren today, but this was the place that really the most important supporters for the Chola kingdoms came from there. And slowly, through intermarriage, the Irukavales also progressed to become larger chieftains, but eventually the Chola kings became so important that the Irukavale chieftains completely went down, and the Cholas moved from being mere kings, supported by chieftains, to actually being emperors, and they could build stuff like this. Yeah. So this is the Brihadishwara temple. I'd love to have a separate talk on this. We'll look at this very, very briefly today. To just give you a sense of scale, the main tower over there towers at almost 200 feet. And it is a feat of engineering because if you look from the bottom and you look up, the whole tower is hollow. The blocks of stone are built at an angle over each other. So if you stand right at the bottom here, you can see all the way till the top. And the top stupi on the top is supposed to be a monolith, which is not true. It's actually 8 blocks of stone, and they must have built ramps that went around to put the stone on the top. It's you can do a whole day seminar on this, but we're going to be brief about this. So if we've understood where they got their money from and how these temples served an economic, social, and political purpose for the Chola kings, now it becomes easy for us to actually understand the Chola temples. This is a lovely Pallava image that I'd like you to show. This is Shiva's Gangadhar, so he has the Ganges on the top of him, and on these 2 pillars is a very beautiful inscription in Sanskrit, which says Shiva is a person who is fond of rivers. Nadi Priya is the name that is used. So Parvati keeps a check on him when he has the Ganga on her head, because she's a little worried about his attentions going astray. And she keeps telling Shiva that, hey, listen, this Kaveri river is not yours. It actually belongs to the Chola king. So and in this, Mahendravarma Pallava, who is before the Chola kings, he says Shiva is Tanu, or he is a permanent god. For a permanent god, I built a permanent temple using neither brick, stucco, or wood. And in building a permanent abode for a permanent god, I have achieved permanency myself. So if he is not talking about brick, stucco, or wood, what is he talking about? Stone. Yeah. So this is our first document. But the Pallava kings were smart. The Mahendravarma Pallava said, I'm the first guy who built the stone temple, so we all remember that. But the Pandya kings were also doing it further down south, but they never put their logo on it. So we don't really take into account that. And in fact, in one of my upcoming tours, we're exploring the border between Kerala and Tamil Nadu. And there are some fabulous cave temples that both the Cheras and the Pandyas constructed, largely unknown to most people in Tamil Nadu or Kerala, but also fine examples. But we all go back to the Pallava kings because he had this very unique way of telling people that he did it the first time. So from those kind of small cave temples, suddenly by the 12th, 13th century, a ritual in a temple needed so many different things. This is a fabulous photograph from the Kumbakonam temple taken by Alexander Rea. My sense is many of these would have been silver, but this would be around 50% of the ritual-related equipment a temple would have used right down till 60 years back. And you can just be amazed by the sense of things that we have. Many of these we don't have at all, but we need to understand why this happened. Now, if you go back and look at how when the kings wanted to equate themselves to God for compliance, every ritual that happened to a king in the palace started happening to God in the temple as well. And suddenly rituals became very, very important, because in our Vedic times, especially in the Rig Vedic time, there were hardly many rituals available, And certainly if you look at the Brahmanas, to look at the list of objects, there are hardly any equipments required. But from there, this becomes different, because now rituals become a way of showing that the god is extremely important. Protocol becomes very important. It's just like in these old country houses, for example, and you'll see this across in the West as well. Servants will have an entry, tradesmen will have an entry, the main people will have an entry, and then when you went into the house or when you came out, you could gauge the amount of respect the host had for you in terms of how far he came, right? Did he come till the doorstep? Did he come till the car park? So all of these are things that we still practice today, and temples weren't very different. So rituals became important. When rituals became important, spaces in temples also changed. If I live as a bachelor, a one-bedroom apartment is enough. If I have a family, I need a few more bedrooms. So spaces also change when requirements change. Rituals become important because now temples just are not houses of God, but they're also places for the kings to show their wealth. Yeah. So in action, then you see processions like this that the kings would have, would also be processions that the temples had. So you had vahanas, you had priests, you had dancers, you had musicians, you had craftsmen working, you had food served in a different way. All of these started improving and changing in the Chola period. So suddenly everything that you wanted in your life, basic needs to needs of a connection with other people, and in terms of a sense of identity and a respect, the temple gave it for the local community. So if we can understand this model or this template and then look at temples, temples become institutions that will teach us something about the way we live our lives today as well. So I'm going to go through this very briefly. The Brihadishwara temple was built around 1,000 years back by Rajaraja Chola. It was clearly his biggest achievement. This interestingly, the one on the top is a watercolor by the person who invented limericks. Limericks. Edward Lear. Edward Lear, who invented... He came down to the south. Can I have some water? He came down to the south, and in those days, it was important. Thank you. In those days, it was important for visitors to the south to go on the grand tour. That was a watercolor that he painted. This, of course, is an aquatint by the Thomas Daniel brothers. The Brihadishwara temple became a really important place to go to, and therefore, when cameras were invented in the old days, one of the most important people to take photographs of these was Captain Linear Stripe. Linear Stripe was a surgeon in the army, in the Madras Presidency, and he taught photography in 1855 at the College of Arts in Chennai. So within 10 years of photographs being discovered, Chennai already had a department for teaching photography, and Linear Stripe taught there. 1856, he became the official photographer for the Madras Presidency, and he was asked to tour the presidency and Burma to take photographs of the local areas to get a sense of how the British saw India. And 1856 to 60 is when he was constantly on the move. Post the Indian War of Independence, this profession became something that was uncomfortable for the British, so they asked him to wind up. So in 1859, he wound up and he went to live in Malta, which is where he died. Tripe was somebody who was greatly in love with this gem that Rajaraja Chola built. And Tripe was very, very worried that future Indians would not recognize the importance of these temples and would let them to decay. So in all his photographs that he shows only the structures. He never has people in it. Otherwise, many of the other British photographers would love to have people in natives dressed in costume to embellish the photograph. Tripe would never have any of those. And Tripe took photographs of the inscriptions in the Brihadishwara temple. These were taken in 1850s when we hadn't discovered that Rajaraja Chola built these inscriptions. We hadn't deciphered the script at that point of time. And these were taken as long photographs stitched together. And I think only 6 of these rolls remain. And obviously none of these rolls are in India. This one, I think, is in Canada somewhere. So when I would love to do a talk on the Brihadishwara temple at some other point in time, but I thought because photographs is such an important part of Sarmaya's collection, I thought we'll just show a few photographs of the Brihadishwara temple. So this is a temple, the massive size of the temple. It had a first floor as well, which was destroyed. The Nandi in the front is a monolith. It's huge. I think it's almost the size of this room. This came in much later, not during the Chola period. If you want to understand the philosophy and the structure of a Chola temple or any good South Indian temple, this is the best one to study because it's an exact combination of two squares. And the Vastu Purusha is shown in these two squares. In other temples, the important guardian deities will be represented as stone blocks. In the Brihadishwara temple, they actually had independent shrines. So we have a very good idea of the understanding of the science of architecture. That inscription on this side of the wall, right on that corner, is an inscription of almost 400 dancing women or Devadasis who Rajaraja caused to be dedicated to the Brihadishwara temple. We have their names, we have their mother's name, we have the town that they originally came from, and we also have their address. We have their door numbers and their street names as well. What is beautiful about this also is we have a sense of what are the qualifications she needed to have as a dancer. We also knew that if she died, who would succeed her, and what would be the constituent committee that will decide whether she was a capable dancer or not. So it's just an example for you to give you a sense of what a man this king was. Rajaraja Chola was able to conceive of a massive monument like this. And remember, all these pieces of stone had to come from close to 100 kilometers away. Because there's no stone in the Tanjavur area. These must have come from Pudukkottai, which is a good 100-120 kilometers away, through water. You couldn't have got this through roads. And he was able to think of this much of detail as well. This is an important view of the temple. You can't quite see it in these old photographs, but on the top, every icon of Shiva is the same. This is an icon of Shiva called Tripurantaka. Tripurantaka is a story when Shiva destroys 3 worlds with 1 arrow. And Rajaraja clearly loved this deity of Shiva. And the reason that he identified himself with Tripurantaka was he said, just like the Chola, just like Shiva destroyed three worlds and became the king, I've also destroyed the 3 great dynasties of South India and I've become king. And all the time you will find that the Rajaraja picks the Tripurantaka image, the Chandikeshwara image, the Sundaramurthy Nayanar image. All of these are important stories in the Shaivite pantheon, and he identifies himself with them to provide more legitimacy to the way he is ruling as well. So this becomes an important shrine. The bottom Koshta figures, all of these are also important for us because the first set give a sense of Shiva in all his angry poses. The second set gives a sense of Shiva in combination poses, so Shiva and Parvati together, Shiva and Vishnu together. The third set on this side gives you the images of Shiva feeling happy. So there's anger, happiness, and at the back is the ones where they're together. This is a very important philosophic concept in Sanatana Dharma, which is Deha Dehi, which is, yes, I am different, you are different, but unless we recognize that we are different and we work from those differences, we cannot live happily. Which is why for us, it's between fire and water. It's not that fire is more important than water. Both of them are equally important. It's not that man or woman is important. Both of them are equally important. It's not about night and day which is important. Both of them are equally important. So this understanding that both are equally important for us to be happy is something that is philosophically shown around this temple. So for that reason, iconography in the Brihadishwara temple is worth studying a little bit more in detail. So eventually, Chola temples became these kind of massive complex structures. This is in Tiruvarur. This is from the 11th, 12th centuries is when all these small temples that we saw earlier. So all of these would have started as temples like this. Like this. They would have all started, this started as a brick temple. Then it was converted to a stone temple. Then when slowly the need for space, the need for ritual started increasing, they started becoming bigger. And then finally, when there was a lot of space that needed to be covered up by different kings, they started becoming like this. So it's worth, there are at least 6 or 7 important Chola temples of this size. So I want to go to something which is offbeat. Now I'd like each of you to look at this image very carefully and tell me, when you see this image, what emotion do you feel? Peace, is it? Okay, maybe we should do a temple tour over there. I'll come back to why But interestingly, when I took a bunch of people here to this on a heritage tour, this is on the Bangalore-Chennai highway, at least 7 people felt fear. Did you feel fear? Okay, wonderful. Because these 3 are spooky tombs. Most of us would know of tombs from Egypt. Tamil Nadu also has tombs. These are 3 temples, one near Chittor, which is in Andhra Pradesh. The next is Melpadi, which is the one that you saw. And the other one near Patishwaram, Kumbakonam is the one that we will also cover. These 3 are tomb temples. So before I come to that, let me explain why we have 2 temples in the first case. The tomb temples, as you can see, were built between around 1000 to 1100. By that time, there were broadly 2 ways to worship Shiva across India. One was the mantra marga, which said, yes, we need to attain Shiva. The way to attain Shiva is through mantras and through hymns. The other group said, well, Shiva is really the god of death. So why go through all this trouble of mantras and pujas and rituals and stuff? The faster you die, the closer you become to Shiva. So the Ati Marga, or the outer route, said that we will do everything that ordinary people will be afraid of doing. Right? So they would normally live in the cremation ground. They would possibly eat human beings and become cannibalistic as well. Their rituals involved dead bodies and things within the cremation ground. And they would, if they came into cities or villages, they would do things that will openly invite curses from other people. So this was a group. We've had several sects like this, the Kapalikas, the Kalamukas, and many, many different sects like this. Sadly, none of them documented what their key fundamental philosophies were. And we know of these only from later commentators and saints and writers like Adi Shankara and Ramanuja and others, who always speak about these people with derision. So you can never understand what their point of view, but clearly it was Ati Marga. The Pashupatas was a group like that, and they worshipped Shiva as Pashupata. Pashupata was essentially, he was a Rigvedic deity who was combined with Rudra. Remember, in the Rigvedic times, Shiva hadn't been created as a god. Shiva just meant auspicious. Rudra was a god who was something to do with howling beasts in the cremation ground. We had Agni, who was a fire god. Then we must have had some other deities whom we do not even able to name very clearly. All of these combined together eventually became Shiva. Lakulisha was a saint from Gujarat. Karyavan is the name of the place. And he exerted a lot of philosophic debate around these kind of groups. And there's one group which were called the Pashupatas, who moved from Gujarat to through Maharashtra to Karnataka, and you still find images of him there. From Karnataka, they moved to the Tanjore area. We don't know why, but Raja and his son Rajendra greatly supported them. So when just between that period, when a person in the royal family died, the body was given over to the Pashupatas. They would have done a lot of really creepy rituals, buried the body in sacred ash, constructed a linga on the top, and then built a temple over this. So 3 of these people, the first one, Parantaka the first, built for his father Aditya. This is a temple which is in Nellore, near Kalahasti in Andhra Pradesh. The second, the one that you saw a photograph of, Rajaraja built it for his father Arinjaya. But the key is Arinjaya died the temple itself was built quite a while after. Rajaraja did it because there was a succession dispute when he came to power. And his way of showing that he was the heir to the throne was to build this shrine for his father to establish legitimacy. And his son did it either for his aunt or for his wife. We're not sure about who they did it. So these temples are called Pallipadai temples. There may be many more Pallipadai temples, but we know these 3 are Pallipadai temples because one of the inscriptions on the side will specifically say this is a Pallipadai or a tomb temple for so-and-so person. And they were all very important functioning temples. Today they're like, you can't make that out. They're very functioning temples. So you can see that they're very, very simple structures. And this is the image inside. And you can see even inside it looks fairly simple, but they have fascinating carvings. On the top is Kanappa Nayanar, which is a saint who went way beyond physical torture to prove his love for Shiva. And at the bottom, we have Shiva and Parvati. I think there's something wrong with the image over here. But you can see each of these images are just 6 inches tall and carved in granite, and you can see the level of execution. So we saw something which was big. We're also seeing something where the Cholas have really gone into the nuances. This is Dakshinamoorthy, of course. So little damage, but Dakshinamoorthy is the form of Shiva, who is the eternal teacher. And you'll find in some of them in the back, there'll be a little people tree with a bag. And the bag is really where you need to leave all your enemies of learning so that you can truly learn from Dakshinamoorthy. This is Vishnu, of course. So now, as you can see, Vishnu has become a Parivara Devata or a subsidiary deity in a Shiva temple. So that's the way Shaivism worked with Vaishnavism to say, yeah, I don't agree with you, but I have to include you anyway. So I'll make you my subsidiary deity, so we'll both be happy in some form or the other. Right? So that's Krishna as Bakasura, slaying Bakasura. And again, this is almost just 6 inches tall. So you can see, even if these Pallipadai temples were built for fairly creepy stuff, they still have a lot of finesse in terms of their carvings. The second one is Panchavan Madheswaram, which is in Pattiswaram, not very far off from Kumbakonam. This was built by Rajendra Chola for either his aunt or his mother. And over here, right over here somewhere, or on the other side, I think it was on the other side of where there is a door, there is a part where it says, this is a Pallipadai temple that Rajendra built for Panchavan Madheswaram. And because by the end of the 11th century, the Lakulisha Pashupatas had become so hated in ordinary society, somebody has actually chipped that word Pallipadai away from the inscription, so you can't read it now. But the temple is still there. It's in a much better state now, actually. And the Koshta figures are there. So you can see that these temples are the Chora temples that never became big complexes. So we can understand how Chora temples originally were, what were the display of the icons around, what were the kind of styles of sculpture from these older temples like this. So that's a lovely Bhikshatana image, still an early period Chola image. That's Dakshinamoorthy again. And the Chin Mudra is an interesting idea. The thumb is always away from us, which is the eternal truth of the God and so on. This finger is always what we use to say you. So when we bring the you and the God together, that's when we realize that we are both one. We may be similar, but we are different as well. So that's why once we recognize that truth and we are able to follow it, then everything in Dharma becomes easy to follow, which is why usually scenes will be shown with the Chin Mudra. That's Kalyana Sundara, that's Shiva with Parvati. You can still see that there's a lot of finesse in the work, especially in Parvati's face. Yeah, so we come to an end. I just wanted to thank these couple of people. Vijay and Arvind are good friends who do a lot of work through a website called Poetry in Stone. And for those of you who want to go deeper into the nuances of Chora temples and iconography, their website is really good. Neelakanta Shastri is this amazing historian who wrote this fabulous book called The Choras, which is still like the 101 for people who want to learn anything about the Chora Empire. The Middle Chola Temples is a book written by S.R. Balasubramaniam. Passed away many years back. SRB was just a school headmaster or something, I think. But that man was an amazing guy. He went across Sri Lanka, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, Andhra, and Karnataka and documented every temple that had anything to do with the Choras. Each of these books are thick enough to be like a pillow, but they are really important sources of work. So if you want to now, if you're interested in visiting some of the Chora temples, I don't know whether it's available for sale, but I think some of it will be available online. The best place to start would be SRB books, because each of those temples are described only in 500, 600 words with photographs, but they will help you understand all of what I've said about the Melpadi temples, for example. Inscriptions, iconography, all of that will be there very easily written. So SRB is a great place to start if you want to know more about Chora temples. Yeah, so I hope you got some sense of where they got their money from and why they invested in temples. We got a very small peek into their crown jewel, but we also got a sense of some of the offbeat temples that people usually don't visit or don't talk about. Yeah. So thank you very much.